Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I just want to start by saying, this is a bad report card. It's a referendum on leadership within the department. Mr. Steyer, I thought you made an excellent point about leadership at the top. Ray LaHood, who I served with in the Congress and the House, has turned around the Department of Transportation, and the morale has gone up. I remember working in the Department of Justice for many years, over a decade, and a lot of it, we believed in the mission, but whoever was appointed at the top as Attorney General had a very big impact on our morale, whether we believed in that Attorney General or not, whether we thought that Attorney General was, we're proud of that Attorney General, for instance, whether that Attorney General was being political. One thing we prided ourselves on was that we weren't political. We had integrity in the process because we were devoid of politics, and we didn't look at things through that prism. And we had, I have to be honest, a little bit of distrust for the political appointees within the department because we thought they had a political agenda, and oftentimes they did. And we felt that we were the ones who were really holding the standard of integrity within the Department of Justice. By not being political. And certainly criminal prosecutions should be devoid of politics. And so you mentioned, I thought, an excellent point, and it relates to Ms. Emerson as well, of the idea of putting some of these positions out of the political appointee realm and rather as a career appointee. And I think, Ms. Emerson, you being a career person gains the trust of the rank and file within the Department of Homeland Security. So I think that's a positive thing that I see. But could you, perhaps the two of you, expand upon what impact really does the top leadership have? And in this case, Secretary Napolitano within the Department of Homeland Security and some of the top leadership, because, again, this referendum is not a positive referendum. It basically says that the rank and file view the top leadership is really there's a bit of distrust, and the morale is low, and they don't approve of their leadership. What do you make of that, and what needs to be done?
Okay, so to begin with, there's no question that leadership, and we have very deep data on this, is the #1 driver for employee engagement. And in the broader leadership, effective leadership category, the old saw is you don't leave your job, you leave your boss. But what we see in the data actually is that senior leadership is a more important component of employee engagement than the first-line supervisor. Both are important. I say that when we say senior leadership, the data does not allow us to disaggregate political from career. So if you're a GS9, you're Border Patrol person, senior leader is not going to just be the secretary. It's going to be many layers down from that as well. And so one of the things I would say, and this is the point that Greg made earlier, which is that this gives us a lot of ideas about questions we should be asking. We need further follow-up information to understand. Frankly, we might even be able to improve the instrument of collecting information so we can understand better whether people are talking about the political leadership versus their career SES. But plainly, the focus on employee morale has to come from the very top. You see that with Secretary LaHood. You see that with Sheila Bair, who was head of FDIC, and you're hearing that right now from Secretary Napolitano in the engagement that she's working on right now, and the set of things that you heard from Catherine Emerson. That is vital. It's also critical that it be sustained, and I think the point that you make about career leadership is very important for a variety of reasons. One of which is that by design, political leaders are going to be turning over fairly quickly. And there's no way they're going to be able to maintain focus over time on a set of issues that require, 4 or 5 years, maybe more. And that's one of the reasons why it makes a lot of sense to have these management positions actually be career positions. Not just the Chief Human Capital Officer, but frankly across the board. We talked about acquisition issues. We talked about, financial issues at the department. They still don't have a confirmed CFO. In fact, I believe there are only 5 of the cabinet agencies that actually have confirmed CFOs. That's a real problem. So not only are these people not staying around a long time, it's hard for them to get into their job And that means that there isn't the leadership that ultimately can focus on very challenging problems over time. The last thing I would say on this point, though, is that this is an issue that DHS has seen for its whole existence. Interestingly, though, when you dig beyond the departmental level, you see components that have made a very, very real difference with their employees, and those are the ones that we need to emulate.
I mean, it's a great point. I think that certainly any administration has certainly the right to place political appointees in trusted positions to move forward their agenda. But I think, having been a rank and file federal employee myself, there is that sort of feeling that, as you said, it's very short term. They're going to be around for a couple of years and they leave, and you feel like you're really the one upholding the department, sustaining it over a long term. And so the idea of maybe, I don't know if you convert some of these political appointees to career necessarily, or perhaps undersecretary positions, you appoint a deputy who is a career person. Perhaps maybe that's a potential solution.
My own view on that, and I'm glad you mentioned the undersecretary position. There's obviously an undersecretary for management. I think actually Undersecretary Boros has done a very good job at DHS, and there's some real results of the work that he's done. I'd love to see that position itself, frankly, be made career. At the end of the day, again, the reason why we have political appointees is to ensure that the policy choices that are being made reflect the will of the president. The management needs are independent of those policy choices. And if you don't have very senior people, there is in fact, I believe, a career deputy in that office. If you don't have a very senior person themselves being career, it may even be a term appointment with a performance contract. Doesn't have to be the same flavor of career, but you need them to be around long enough with the expectation that they're focusing on that long-term health of the organization, so that the political team coming in isn't going to be in that rapid turnover actually disruptive to those critical management issues.
I couldn't agree with you more. Ms. Emerson, do you have any comments on that?
Having recently come from FAA, which was part of Department of Transportation, and leading employee engagement there, I echo what you say, how important it is for top level leadership to support employee engagement and morale initiatives. And I have to tell you that Secretary Napolitano is very dedicated to improving employee morale and satisfaction in DHS. In fact, she was one of the reasons I was hired was because of my work that I had done in employee engagement at DOT. But also, she has recently sent out a memorandum and held meetings with the component heads regarding this very issue. And in fact, we had Partnership for Public Service at our last meeting to come and talk about what we can do in DHS to improve employee morale and satisfaction. And I have to say, the component heads were all very engaged themselves and reported out on action planning that they were doing in their components. And the Secretary is holding them accountable for that. So.
Well, I do commend the Secretary for putting you in that position and making it a career position as well. I think that's a positive development. I know you've only been in the job for less than a year, so you have quite a challenge in front of you, and I wish you all the best and success with it. Mr. Maurer, as I mentioned earlier, DHS is I really don't envy anybody who's appointed Secretary of Homeland Security. It is a real challenge. You're always in the bullseye. It's always, they call it stepchild, they call it a whipping boy. We saw Tom Ridge came in, I thought provided great leadership. Mr. Chertoff came in and had a lot of challenges on his plate. Now, currently, Secretary Napolitano has an enormous challenge. But when we hear about, SBI-net, the failure of SBI-net, which you and I have talked about, the daily, I feel for the TSA screeners because that's, in some respects, a thankless job. We hear the stories about patting down, children and grandmothers and that sort of thing. In the last hearing, we heard testimony about Border Patrol agents taking bribes and actually working with the drug cartels. We heard about the mismanagement of FEMA, disaster funds, and I could go on and on. What impact do you believe that these issues have on the morale at the department?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly, problems like that don't help morale at the department. So that certainly is not doesn't create a kind of work environment where people are going to be necessarily looking forward to getting up every morning and going in and meeting those kind of challenges. Now, the good news is at DHS, there is overwhelming support among the rank and file, and they believe strongly in the mission that they're performing. I think that's a very good thing. But I think one of the key after effects of having low morale scores within the department is that it affects the department's ability to brand itself with the taxpayers and prospective employees. Because when people are thinking about where they want to work, you'd like them to think about DHS in a very positive light. You'd like them to think about DHS as being a place where there's top-notch talent, it's a great place to work, there's great morale, and I can make a difference in securing this nation. They're making great strides, but having relatively low morale scores and being in the headlines for not having good morale certainly doesn't help with that. So that's one of the things that we sort of highlighted in some of our prior work. And I think to address that, the department is on the right path. They do need to have this clear leadership commitment from the very top of the department. I think it's certainly going to help if they can make progress in integrating the management functions to form a common support base across all of DHS. But I think the really critical thing they need to do is sort of dig into within the individual components and figure out what are the root causes behind the morale issues. Because what they may find is that there's a wide variety of issues that are specific to individual components or even within components. A lot of these organizations within DHS are large in their own right. There are 6 major components within DHS that employ more than 10,000 people. So there's different stories embedded within DHS. And so we'd like to see a combination of this high-level strategic support for addressing morale issues combined with a better, more granular understanding of the root causes.
That's a good point. I look at, when I went on a trip on Veterans Day to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iraq, and I see our military serving, and they have a great pride of service under very difficult circumstances, and they are protecting America's interest abroad. And yet, I think the department, there is an opportunity to turn it around. I think when you look at the mission of the department, it's to protect the American people at home. And they should take great pride in that, and I know a lot of them do. And I applaud the efforts of the rank and file within the department. And sometimes it is a thankless job, but I think that I think the department has a lot to learn from the Department of Defense and the military. And if we could transpose that mission of service to protecting Americans, as the military has, if we could somehow place that upon the Department of Homeland Security, protecting Americans at home. I think that would go a long ways. And Mr. Starr, you talked about, the DoD model, and you talked about Goldwater Nichols. And can you expand upon that? And what can the DHS learn from the Department of Defense?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the most interesting stories at Department of Defense is that there really are 2 organizations there. There's the military, as you described, and there's also then the civilian service. So there's close to 700,000 civilian employees at DoD, and they're managed quite differently than those that are in uniform. And importantly, I think that the military has a very different perspective on its investment in its talent. They have a strong culture and belief that they are going to develop their talent in all ways possible, and leadership is, number one for them. So I think the number one lesson that, frankly, could be learned is just the priority that's placed on viewing employees as an asset, not a cost, and really growing their skills and abilities. And I think that has a lot to do with the success of our military. Interestingly, that same approach isn't, in fact, taken for the civilians at DoD. Their scores are better than DHS, but they're still not at the top of the heap. And I think that's worth some further exploration, and the opportunity is really there. There are some things that DoD has done historically with the military, and I mentioned joint duty as being one of them, as a way of really integrating their services. I think they recognize you can move the boxes around as much as you want, but you're going to actually create relationships and understanding much better by moving the people instead. And so they created an incentive, a requirement, in order to become a flag officer, you actually had to have worked with the other services. And they're now taking that model and applying it to the civilian side. I believe this year is the first year they're going to have that requirement. So they're looking at for their career executives on the civilian side, an expectation that they have the experience of having worked cross-organizationally. I believe that same opportunity exists at DHS. I think that having their folks rotate through intra-agency, but frankly intergovernmentally, and even better intersector, would create better skills, better understanding, better relationships. The challenges they have to address are multi-sector challenges, and we need to have a workforce that reflects a knowledge base and an understanding of how those other sectors work better. So the mobility point, I think, is extraordinarily important and would have long-term impact on bringing the agency together and improving its ultimate performance.
So, a very good point, and I think that's probably why the Coast Guard ranks so high in the survey, whereas the rest of the department probably did not. And so I think we have a lot, and I think you're right, it's the culture.
Yes.
It's the culture, and I think that's the great challenge, Ms. Emerson, that you have and the Secretary has, is to try to change the culture to inspire them that their mission is important, that they're protecting the American lives at home. And Dr. Pond, I want to give you the last word.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I appreciate the last word.
Of course, the ranking member just showed up, so you may have another word.
Mr. Keating, you will have the last word, I believe. From my experience as the Chief Human Capital Officer of the U.S. Department of Energy, many of the same issues occurred, and you nailed it on the head, which is its culture, its shared mission and story. When I first started Department of Energy, people in the complex talked about the Department of Energy as the DHS of the 1970s. It was never integrated very well, but if you actually go in the lobby of the Forrestal building where the headquarters is, what we did was we made sure that we had a common history. It starts with walking to the left, you have Einstein's letter to FDR, warning about Germans actually acquiring different scientists around Eastern Europe and Western Europe for the harnessing of the atomic weapons. And then it goes on to celebrate the Nobel Prize winners, the nuclear complex, the scientific discovery of the 17 national laboratories, the management excellence that we had. And it really talked about how under 5 things, defense, energy security, scientific discovery, environmental responsibility, and management excellence, everybody could hang their hat on. And it made the people understand that they had relevance and role to the mission of the department. With the organization like DHS, you have 22 separate cultures and agencies, and as Admiral Allen previously stated, you have different cultures with different maturity levels. Also, you're compounding the complexity there because you have over 200 occupations. We've addressed some of the things about the career professional being a CHCO in human resources or acquisition. There's another 190 different occupations you have to actually occur to. So having different types of standards for each and every one of the support professions may be a good way to ensure the continuity of the support functions there. What I've found is that many of my fellow Chicos and many of the CFOs, political or whatnot, didn't really have qualifications, didn't grow up in HR functions or financial functions. And that happens too often when you have the criteria of a chief human capital officer not having any HR background. And as the Society for Human Resources Management, what we're trying to do, not only in the government but elsewhere, is to make sure the standards of practice is well known, make sure we can have a body of knowledge and a practice that can be certified eventually so that you'll have common parallels to accounting.
Excellent point. I want to thank you for your testimony. The chair is